A good evening and welcome to the Fourth Estate. My name is Raymond Mujini, and this week we're looking at the big stories of the week. The biggest story of the week, without any doubt, is the National Unity Platform and their fight for who is the leader of the party or who controls the party. And I have with me a list of some of the most elaborate guests to discuss this. Let's start with an introduction of you, Yusuf, for our guests.
My name is Yusuf.
The other name,
Yusuf
a full name.
I write a column with The Observer.
All right, thank you so much.
Well, my name is Kenneth Lukwago. I work with Radio 1, where I do news gathering. I also produce a primetime talk show, which is Spectrum. Thank you.
All right, gentlemen, I wanted us to start our conversation with the National Unity Platform. At the start of this week, the party was in court to fight for the leadership of who is the leader of the National Unity Party. And the former leaders of then the National Unity and Restoration Party are saying that they were not involved in the processes under which the party was taken over, and now that it has gained political fame, they need to be involved in the processes, but more importantly on who becomes the president of the party. Starting with you, Yusuf, what did you make of the story when it finally came out?
It's a story which can go many ways, right? Depending on the editorial direction of his reporting it can go many ways, right? One can choose to focus on the politics of the story, and one can choose to focus on the legalese of the story. All those can take you different ways, right? My interest for me, perhaps I should say, is the way it's being reported is there's a lot that's missing. You know, if you come from the scholarly world and you've been in the newsroom, I feel if we did a profile of Kibalama first, right, a very extensive profile. I've been reading all the stories, they touch it in passing. A former police officer, a former spy, an intelligence officer, who at one point wanted to defraud a bank. So, you know, the way the story is being covered, I think profiles of the key actors will be very important for the story. I mean, Bob Wine is quite well known, he's one of the actors, but I think Kibalama, one who's just come from near oblivion, right? We didn't know him very much. I think media houses would have invested time and resources to do a proper profile. I've even been thinking, what if he's friends with the CDF, right? And the meeting they had was a meeting of friends, and it's being misconstrued to mean CDF was interfering in the politics of the party, right? Also, those who are suing on behalf of NURP, we don't have them, right? They're not being brought to the fore. Who are these people? What are their backgrounds? I think these are missing links in this story. And that would be a good beginning point for us to appreciate the drives, the motivations, the backgrounds, because this is a story which crosses two fields of political interaction, the legal and the political. So before because we tend to see it as this purely political story, right? Or a political fallout playing out in the legal at the legal front. But if we had the profiles of all these actors, especially the little-known actors, it would be very interesting to appreciate either it's politics or it's legalese, all right? About the way the story unfolded in court, personally, I have problems with the way it played out. I think Meda Saguna did a wonderful job, but a wonderful job for the wrong cause, right? Because I've argued before that I think NUP should have invested resources early enough in finding their former president, right? He's not the enemy. But if you look at the discourse, I think, on social media and also in some of the close NUP circles, from the very beginning, you see him being described as the enemy from the very beginning, and I think it's a wrong thing. Even when you look, the frame, the spirit of the cross-examination in court the other day, it looked like he was the enemy. He's not.
We'll get into the weight and the merits. Kenneth, what did you think of the way that the media reported this story? From Monday, at least, all the way to Friday, there was a headline on NUP every day. How did you think of the level of coverage that they offered this story?
Well, I think the level of coverage that was offered the story was pretty good, but like Yusuf here says, there are bits and details about the key players that are yet to be known by the public. Probably it would be able to make us understand what kind of people that Robert Kyagulanyi and his team chose to deal with. But from the side of publicity, you can really see that the momentum is there, largely because of the interest that the young people in NUP have caused on the political scene. So you see there is interest from a wide range of media outlets, not only those that are local here, but even those international, you could clearly see they were all interested in how these issues were unfolding. But looking at what really happened before you actually get to the court was the apparent disappearance of Mr. Kibalama from his residence. I was following online, you know, one of the things that the NUP people have invested in is an online infrastructure. They are able to have some of these things transmitted through different Facebook pages, including an online publicity channel called Ghetto TV, which they are using in most cases. I saw people actually describe themselves as relatives of Kibalama, trying to explain what had actually happened at his residence. And then a mix-up that followed up with the UPDF spokesperson explaining that Mr. Kibalama was actually under the protection. And so we kept on wondering, he's being protected from who? Is it the NUP people who have tried to attack him? What would be the story around there? Until when the gentleman came to court to actually narrate what had transpired. So there's some aspects of this story that were left hanging by the media. But it's a story that keeps on developing, and I'm sure it's something that the media will continue to follow.
Yusuf, one of the things that many political editors that I've interacted with this week particularly have put forward is there's a lot of excitement around NUP, which makes it hard to report on as a party. The excitement blurs the journalists from getting to the sources, but even when they get to the sources, the level of questioning they can put to them is not the kind of questioning that's holding them to account. So for example, there's questions that have not been answered. When was this party formed? Where was it formed? Which people formed it? What's its constitution? What were the circumstances under which the delegates conference at Kachiri was held? And many editors seem to suggest that outside of just the media alone, there's a lot of pressure from NUP supporters for their story to be told a certain way. Would you agree that this is what's happening? But also as an editor, would you play into the card of reporting the story the way that NUP supporters would want you to?
There is a bit of that, and I want to argue that I think editors missed an opportunity when NUP had just been born, right? It was missed opportunity, telling us that was NURDP, which became NUP. That moment, it wasn't it as tense and political as it is right now. It was a moment to go back and actually bring all this material to the fore, right? Dig deep and see what was this party, when was it formed, what happened, what was, you know, I think NTV here did a story where somebody said, I mean, this is the party we started out drinking joint. We were so critical and we said, maybe we should start something, like a drinking mat of Kibalama said, we started this party drinking joint, all right? So all this material had to be dug and brought to the ground then. Now it is tense. There's a bit of anger on the part of NUP people who, in their vibrancy and charismatic activism, they think the state is politically pushing them into oblivion, into extinction because of the oomph they've gathered over the period, right? So there's a bit of that. And that anger streams into the newsroom, right? And I believe you me, the newsroom is not sort of an objective space, a pristine objective space. Even journalists have opinions, including editors themselves, they have opinions. So, you know, the anger that is felt on the streets of Kampala streams into the newsroom. Editors feel this anger, right? My friend, Jimmy Spice Santongo, as a cartoonist, feels this. He's written quite extensively on anger in the NUP front, that, you know, when a story is critical, they are so angry. But I think, you know, I don't know how editors, but I think editors should be above this to a degree, right? They should be able to rise their game and say, okay, we feel the anger, but we have to do an objective story. But I also think that those are not sufficient explanations as to why we're not going as deep as that, right? I don't think it's the anger just as that. I also think this is like the usual cry for media houses. We're strapped of resources, right? If you ask to profile Kibalama in a succinct way, you'll need 2 weeks to visit his village where he was born, find his mom, find his parents, go to the schools he went to, and some sort of provide a deeper understanding of who this man is. If you ask to do that, you'll need 2 weeks of resources and time. I don't think there's a media house which has this time and resources, right? You know, and I think it's the same problem we're having right now with the death of Alhaji Nassan Sewagala. You know, nobody took time to profile. There's not a book length, a narrative of the life and success of Haji Nassan Sewagala, right? And I think, you know, you should speak to this directly, that we are not profiling our people who make news. Right now, there's gap in the media that you need to profile all the key actors in the NUP so that you can have a good sense. And I think the problem is resources, unnecessarily.
Do you think the problem is a problem of resources? I mean,
well, I don't think that's the main reason probably why the media was left behind. First of all, to be able to understand why the media has been left behind in covering the birth of NUP and all that came out is the fact that the current leaders of NUP understood probably the kind of political environment they were operating in, and they chose to actually handle the transformation of this political party from what it was to what it is quietly. And I think they managed to do that. How they managed to do that, nobody knows, but if you look at the documentation that has been put forward, the processes they followed, I guess the reason why the media could not pick interest immediately was because Mr. Kibalama and the others were nobodies, but the media comes up to follow this story because suddenly it is Bobby Wine and the People Power people who are now in charge of this political party. So everything happened, and looking at what has been discussed, whether on social media or on platforms like this where we are, everybody was shocked. The process through which Robert Kyagulanyi and his team went through to actually have the name of this political party changed, the delegates conference held, and probably, and most important of all, them being elected as new leaders. You could clearly see that everybody was taken by surprise about what had actually happened. And I give it to Kyagulanyi and his team. How they managed to pull that off, nobody knows, because nobody even within their group was able to sneak out this kind of information, which I think would have caused the problem.
At the announcement of the birth of NUP, and them taking pride in their clandestine operations towards the registration, that story had to be told, right? Either NTV had to give us a panorama on that story, on how they quietly, overtly, and silently actually registered the party and had the delegates conference held, right? I think that was a missed opportunity. We should have had a longer, a 10 minutes, 15 minutes documentary on this going back. You know, Robert Kyagulanyi was harassed into releasing a video of him being sworn in as new president. Right?
And that's exactly what I wanted to chip in.
Media should have had this video.
If you had allowed me to continue. What I wanted also to say that the NUP people have been crafty, and they have actually beaten the media to the game, because at a certain point they have been able to control the narrative because of how they release this kind of information. For instance, while people were still debating and arguing that there was no delegate conference held, all of a sudden we thought Bobby Wine putting up this video, and Mr. Kibalama and the former Secretary General were there actually giving him the instruments of power. You can imagine that kind of narrative, and all of a sudden the media was left behind. So the NUP people have also been crafty, given the manner in which they handled the birth of this political party. They have also been able to control the narrative.
I don't know. Do you think journalists are part of the NUP in a way?
No.
Journalists are part of any.
Our moderator here, Raymond, is close friends with Bobby Wine, right?
Yeah, I'm close
but the fact that Bobby Wine didn't actually tell you that there is something going on in Wakiso as a delegates conference, you'd give that to him.
No. Much to our credit, I think that the Monitor broke the initial story of the fact that there would be a new party launched the day before the party was launched, and with at least an elaborate list of who would be Secretary General, what the party would look like, where it would go. But the thing that you mentioned on the day of the launch is that it was a competition for priorities. The day of the party's launch, there were also politicians crossing from different camps towards NUP. There were also reactions coming from different camps in towards NUP. And there was very little time, actually, from the time of the swearing in and the time of breaking the news, but about 12 hours to work with to be able to produce a profile that would have been worth the merit. Wouldn't have really, the turnaround time was too small to produce something of quality. And which brings me to my question that I wanted to ask you guys, that in a situation of competing priorities...
Would you allow me to finish? I think that Kenneth opened, it speaks to what you just said. you know, in times of crisis, it's natural to side with the oppressed, right? And I think this is like a powerful point for me, is that all objective, smart, young, educated journalists feel the oppression in this country, right? And they've taken sides. They may claim objectivity, which I think is really problematic, but they've taken sides. And they have been conscripted to the ways in which NUP operates, right? Their conscription could be involuntary, but they've been conscripted. Now, the silence, the ways in which Bobi Wine is operating pleases many journalists at the same time. Now, when he's been beaten by the state, the journalists fall with him, right? So the falling of Bobi Wine, a huge section of journalists, maybe including myself, would like it to fall with Bobi Wine, right? Maybe including myself, because you know the conscription is...
Do you fall with him because you believe in his political aspirations, or you fall with him because of the story that he's driving forward? Are you able to separate?
You know, and that's the debate.
I think the symbolism that he represents, right, is the aspiration for so many young, smart journalists in this country, the aspiration of a new dispensation where we see, you know, I mean, and journalists, it's even worse for journalists because we interact with the mess in this country on a daily, right? As opposed to many ordinary Ugandans. Media interact with the mess in this country. So anybody who's advocating changing of this mess is likely to conscript involuntarily many journalists.
And that's the question I wanted to ask you guys about balance, objectivity, and fairness. Honestly, as a friend of Bobi Wine, on many occasions I sit out stories which come from NUP. I don't edit them. I don't discuss them when editors are discussing them. I only contribute where I feel I have insider information or some information I've gotten from sources to help make the story much better. But it's also the role of editors inside the newsroom to listen to what's happening inside of political parties. How do you strike that balance to say, I've heard this will be published, this will not be published because of the friendship relationship you have with the source who is in the news every day?
Yeah, neutrality is an illusion, as we say, right? There's nothing that a journalist is going to stand on the wall and watch, very neutral as a viewer, and then report what is saying. If a genocide is happening, it's highly likely that journalists will side with the victims, right? So it doesn't. You don't have to publicly proclaim that I am people power. Nobody's going to do that, right? But the editorial direction. This is why Daily Monitor has been branded as an opposition newspaper. So is The Observer, the one that I write for. It's been branded opposition newspapers because of the thing called editorial direction. Objectivity is really lost very quickly because and I said it's worse for people who interact with the news every day. It's really worse. It's difficult not to be conscripted, right? So if you're speaking the language of objectivity and you're reporting NUP, you're reporting yourself at the same time.
Kenneth, you have a phone book of politicians in this country. You can call any of them, and I know you have a lot of friendships. At what point do you strike the balance and say, today, our friendship goes to the side, and I report this very objectively? At what point do you say, what you've told me in conversation is going to end up on the news? At what point do you say, okay, what you've told me perhaps doesn't need to be in the news?
Well, first of all, there are cardinals and principles on how to actually handle a news story. So as somebody who is reporting on a story, you are able to tell whether this story needs to be balanced or not. There are certain aspects that don't need to be balanced. For instance, Bobi Wine is probably talking about alleged claims of corruption in the political party, because it's one of the things that was making headlines this week, that people were actually buying the NUP flag. I don't see a reason why I should actually I should have balanced that. So, but there's certain stories that, certain things that he would say, probably, that you think, you have to balance the sensitivity of what is being said and the relevance of the information that is actually being put forward. So, like you said, there are a wide range of people in this country who speak for the government, different dockets. It could be the spokesperson, the government spokesperson. It could be. There is no point where you should kill a story that has some element of news in it. It's just a matter of actually calling somebody the other side to be able to have their say on this particular aspect. So in our newsroom, the advantage we have, we're probably a radio. You have a contact of somebody, you have a recording from maybe NUP people speaking about something. you just call the other person and get a sound clip from them to be able to have their say. So I think there's a point where, as a journalist or as an editor, you are able to tell whether this is something that the public needs to consume or something that shouldn't go in the public domain.
Yusuf, in a minute or less, the history, you know, we also operate within a history of a country. It's not new. For example, Wafula Ogutu, who used to edit the Daily Monitor, ended up in the Forum for Democratic Change. Semu Junganda, edit the Observer, ended up in Forum for Democratic Change. We have other editors who, while New Vision, Ofono Pondo, for example, Simon Kairo, ended up working with the National Resistance Movement. Is it to suggest then that the people inside the newsroom have a living aspiration of the political affiliation of which they belong, and the reportage that they see in the newsroom is to fulfill that aspiration, or it's maybe to hold that aspiration to account?
I want to speak about time here. I recall a very interesting exchange between James Tumsime, one of the founding editors of the New Vision, and William Pike, reporting what should we report about a trip where government went and had a meeting in Marshall Falls, right? They used heavy vehicles, spent so much money, and they discussed issues of national importance, right? So William Pike wanted to report on the vehicles and the money what we spent on the trip. James Tumsime insisted we should report on the issues that were discussed during the meeting. Both were true, right? Both were accurate reports. But while Pike insisted on the money spent and the type of vehicles used, James Tumsime took the day by reporting the issues that happened. Now, but this is in the initial stage of the NRM, right? Journalists used to meet with the subjects of news at what's this place down here? This very enigmatic restaurant.
The Winter?
No, Kampala Club. Oh. They used to meet at Kampala Club and speak to the sources, the newsmakers, and give them stories. And then they would report those stories, right, very objectively. But that was then. All of us were co-opted into this euphoria of a new beginning, right? Now, 35 years on, this euphoria is gone, right? There were reports then, especially from the Crusader and other newspapers of the time, even Montague-Gisborne, which reported on the mess that was happening in the country then, right? But there was a general anticipation, there was genuine excitement around a birth of a new era. NRM was ushering into this country. So even media really got these stories and reported them objectively. Now, to report in favor of government in the mess we've seen is considered to be idiot, to be very stupid, right? If you report, I've seen the Red Paper editor on social media, like avidly defending the CDF involvement with Kibalama, and he's been called all sorts of names, right? You've seen our friend Andrew Mwenda, his insistence on pointing out the technical strides that this government has done, are all of them branded as idiocy, right? The times have changed. That right now, the times of good journalism is to stand on the side of the oppressed. And I think that's what we're saying. But when you see these gaps in reporting of NUP, the gaps are sort of involuntary gaps in the sense that journalists seem to love the ways in which people is playing their game. And if they fall with them.
All right, thank you so much, Yusuf. We're going to take a very short break, but when we return, we'll discuss NUP and the crossings that have, they declared their Lord Mayor aspirant, and the Lord Mayor aspirant stepped down a day later. Let's continue. All right, thank you so much for coming back with us on the Fourth Estate. We're still with Yusuf and Kenneth discussing the National Unity Platform and what's happening inside the party and how journalism is reporting this new opposition party. Gentlemen, I want us to start with a very iconic thing that happened inside of the party this week. And also, again, very little reporting was done around it. The National Unity Platform had spent almost 2 months looking for flag bearers. And they handed their flag to a Lord Mayoral aspirant who was Latif Sewagala. And the day after, Latif Sewagala steps down from holding the flag. And to date, I've really flipped all the papers, I've flipped all the TV channels to get an explanation for what happened, and nobody seems to be offering that explanation. Do you gentlemen know exactly what context this story sits in? Why would someone resign a day after being given what was a hotly contested flag? Kenneth, have you heard anything from the corridors that would explain a story like this?
Well, I have heard that actually there have been talks going on within the opposition about the issue of Kampala, and probably there came a point where the party was in that kind of situation, and it had to go back to Sebagala Latif himself to be able to call it off and say, look, I will not be running. Because if you listen to the explanation he gave, first he says it's a personal decision, then he says it's for the good of the opposition, and he also says because there was a lot of pull here and there within the NUP party, with a sizable number of NUP people actually supporting somebody who is not from within the political party. And some people have been actually saying that probably that person could be Erias Lukwago. And I've also had people who are talking about possibility of discussions having gone on within the Muslim circles, and some people who matter within that particular area, calling the shots and telling these people, look, this is an opportunity for us. You know, the politics here in Uganda, these are some things we would want to dismiss, but they actually happen. You hear people talking about a vice president with a Catholic, and so on, so, you know. So I think those who have actually been talking about this say they came to a point where they realized that probably the person who had an upper hand was Erias Lukwago, and therefore it didn't make sense for the two Muslims to go at each other. So probably it went down to him himself, Honorable Latif Sebagala, to say, look guys, this is it, I'm getting out. Because it will be very hard for somebody to actually believe, like you said, hotly contested after what we saw Chameleon saying, and then it is handed to you, and then all of a sudden you pull out. But then it gets even more interesting, just as Latif pulls out, NUP again announces that the place is open. Who do we see going for Nabila Sempala? So it becomes
she's Muslim
very
too.
interesting. She's Muslim too. So
but look, the Muslim angle
questions.
is really the weakest in this argument. There is no religion in this case. Muslims are often going against each other, and it's normal business, right? And I really, with the slightest imagination that Latif Sebagala stood a chance of maybe even destabilizing Lukwago's victory, right? I don't think he did, because he's even weak in a small constituency. As his constituency, I don't know if he has the muscle to mobilize for an entire city, right? So I really think I'm persuaded by the Monta story on Latif Sebagala this Sunday. The story is written about his flip-flopping. He's very undecided. I think he's amateurism on the part of Latif Sebagala as a politician. I think he's very amateur politician. Seemingly sort of...
You can't describe him as an amateur. The man who has been in parliament for almost 2 decades.
Yeah.
Surely.
Yeah,
there has to be something beyond.
It's not about the time you spend at it, right? It's about
what he has learned from
exactly. It's not about the time. I think he's an amateur politician. He's flip-flopped in the last couple of months. He was standing for mayor. He announced standing for mayor on the DP ticket, contesting internal against Elias Lukwago. All of a sudden, he went to NUP, wanted something. Then he quickly went back to standing for, suggested he wanted to stand for the constituency again. And then he said, right now I'm back to. And you know, I think NUP is quickly seeing through his amateurism, and what they've done is as soon as he stepped down, they announced the place. Right? If there had been an involvement of, say, the titular head of the Muslims of this country, they're on good talking terms with Bobi Wine. There's no way Bobi Wine, after this argument with the titular head of the Muslims in this country, would again announce that the place is open. Right?
I wanted us to talk the really hard knock politics of our country. Some of it doesn't appear in the papers, but it must appear. NUP knows that they stand very little chance nationwide without the structures of the Forum for Democratic Change. And the Forum for Democratic Change seems to have opened up for actual talks with NUP. And some of those actual talks include seeding ground in areas where FDC thinks that they will win. And one of those areas is the Lord Mayor race, where Elias Lukwago sits. Could it have been that this is the start of a long-form coalition where you have a weaker candidate?
Look, they have a candidate standing against MJ Munganda, right? Who is perhaps one of the most eloquent politicians of our time in the opposition. They have candidates standing up against other really strong FDC candidates in this country, right? They also have a candidate standing up against. Again, they've announced the place is open. So I don't think I think Joe Senyo was on this show and he said there's been remote conversations since they started their party. The conversations have become really very difficult to have with the other political parties, right? I think from the first of it, they've agreed that we can move in our separate units. We don't have to come together, which is a good point for me. Although I think it would be better if they agreed to simply unite in boycotting the entire madness around the electioneering. But it has nothing to do with strategizing towards a
but
coalition.
Also politics is about money, and it's also about religion. Particularly in Kampala, it's about money and it's about religion. It's not by chance that, you know, we have the Kampala Central Member of Parliament being Muslim. It's not by chance that the Lord Mayor comes from the Muslim
I think we need to unpack.
I don't think it's not by chance.
We need to sort of take out, okay, it's a bit of that, but I think we need to take out the Muslim identity a little bit from this very successful
But it sits at the heart of it.
Elias Lukwago has made a legacy, has made an identity as an indefatigable opposition candidate. The key questions in this country, in this city, for example, because Kampala is uniquely different from politics across the country, the contenders we see here, the key Muslim firebrands in this city have made their identities as strugglers against Museveni's government, not necessarily as Muslim scholars, right? This country has very well accomplished Muslim scholars. My friend Sajid Fampa Sambu stood in Waga South. He was knocked out by a comedian, right? It's not about being Muslim. It's about the identity you build. Look, Waga has built his identity. Samji Brahimanganda, the political analyst on CBS Fame, was far, far more firebrand. So that legacy, the one that took into the election, Nsvambi is not standing in Kampala. Most of these guys who have built their legacies, they only happen to be Muslims. But they have built their legacies fighting against this government. So what happens in this city is your stand against the status quo. Right? It's not really being Muslim. There's so many Muslims who are standing for position, they're not anywhere close to winning.
But okay, I want to bring it to Kenneth. One of the things that again stood out about NUP was immediately they announced that Latif Sebagala had gone through. Joseph Mayanja, who had run against him, released the form for which they had been vetted against. And one of the areas where they were looking at very strongly was the religion of the candidate who was running. So what is it about the NUP selection process that journalism should have told and said, why is this seemingly young party that is very likely going to sweep the elections in Kampala, why are they concerned about religion? Nobody explained that story for us.
Well, I'm not so sure whether it's Joseph Mayanja. I'm not so sure whether it's the one actually who released the form, because later on, like 2 days later, I saw NUP releasing another form and published it on social media and said the other one was actually fake. And in this other form, there was no aspect of religion. They didn't actually show it in the other form. But you see, you can't take away religion from the politics of Uganda. It's something that is up there, and we've seen it, and people will tell you even when the president is naming his cabinet, he has to do balancing here and there. It's something that is there, but the reason I brought up the religion aspect is because you had asked me to actually say what I had heard people talking about, and I heard it. People have been discussing this thing, whether it is a Muslim factor that actually pushed Latif Sebagala out of the race. But going by what he said and the statement he released, I think it would be very difficult for us even to find the truth, because he talks about two very important things. He says actually, one, look, there are people within NUP who are supporting another candidate who is not even a member of NUP. What does that tell you? That probably NUP people, despite the process that they are going on internally, they are looking at somebody else. Then he tells you, look, for the good of the entire opposition, because if I go in this race, we are likely to lose Kampala. He seems to be talking about Elias Lukwago, who is the de facto Lord Mayor and the incumbent as such.
Do we have proof that meeting really happened?
So,
it's in our imagination.
So you imagine the scenario he throws us in as a media to be able to understand some of these things, you know. So
do we have proof, Anderson, that this
meeting
actually happened?
Which meeting in particular?
The one that was shepherded by the titular head of Muslims.
Well, I haven't spoken about the titular head of the Muslim.
You said somebody influential, and
I just said...
well, I read the story too, and I read the story too. That they referred to Prince Imbogo, right? And I'm just wondering, do we have evidence this meeting actually happened, that he negotiated Latif out of the race?
And maybe these are the questions we have to be asking of the media because of the fourth estate. That's the thing we're asking. There are a lot of inexplicables that are happening inside of NUP. But gentlemen,
let me say this quickly.
We are going into the final part. No, I'm going to give you a chance to.
For the strength of the constituency, Islam is not a cult. Right? It's not a cultist
Nobody
following.
said it's a cult.
That whoever shows up, as long as they have a Muslim name, they bear Muslim identity, support them.
Look, one of the most respected politicians I know in this country is Haji Hussein Chanjo. He kept on raising these things even on the floor of parliament, wherever appointments were made. He would look at the list and say, there is no Muslim here. Even Adjunct Chief Sebagala himself, who happens to be the Imam of the Muslims in parliament.
Yeah, but look, this is sharing the...
So let's not
wait.
It's a fact.
No, you're mixing two things there. This is sharing the national cake. He's the head of state giving the national cake.
And elective positions are also... elective positions
are not
an aspect of a cake.
Are not negotiated that way.
But
you have to go out there in the trenches and ask and demand for votes. Unless you're telling me that even Elias Lukwago, rather Hussein Chanjo, used to get voted much in there because he was a Muslim.
No, if we took out...
Asman Basara stood in the most majority constituency. He lost how many times? Many times.
Yusuf, if we took out, say, Islam from it, and say the strong Catholic constituencies, Masaka, Kalungu, we see the MPs campaign. They go with rosaries around them, whether it's Mathias Impuga, whether it's the Kalungu MP, they all wear rosaries around them. And it's not by chance that they wear these rosaries. It's not by any chance. The head of state, on many occasions, goes to the Anglican Church first before he goes to the Catholic Church. And it's the structure of power. When power is handed to Uganda,
politics is performative.
Yes.
Politics is performative. You have to perform certain things so that you look believable. When you go to a bunch of drinkers enjoying the drink, you want to look like them, right? If you go to a place where people are playing cards, you want to play cards at the same time. Politics is performative. Even the idea of a state, it makes itself visible through performative practices, right? So when a man wears a rosary when he's going to campaign in a predominantly Christian neighborhood, he's trying to perform the politics of that place, right? And it's as simple as that. It may translate into voice, it may never, right? But I want us to focus on the identity, on the public profiles in response to the questions of the time. If you are asking questions, what is the Kampala question right now? What is the news around which somebody is voted as an MP in the city, right? What is this? And I'm telling you, many Christians in Chira vote for Samji Manganda. In the city, many Christians vote for Elias Lukwago because they understand the question of the time. The question of the time, who is not the most authentic over the religion? It is who is closest to unseating the president? And that's the big question in this country, in this city.
Gentlemen, so very finally, I wanted us to talk about electioneering, and these really final words because we're out of time. The electioneering is here again, and the former head of opposition, still pretty much the head of the opposition, Kizza Besigye, has insisted that the electioneering process is actually one of the places where the ruling party performs the best, so that they can keep the opposition engaged in this electioneering. Do you see the opposition coming out of this electioneering unscuffed, particularly amongst themselves? Is it possible that after each party declares who their flag bearer will be, they will remain unscuffed?
That's not a possibility. The reason there's an election there is because there will be a winner and a loser. And some of the constituencies where the opposition is actually, where the opposition parties are all fronting candidates, there would be a loser and there would be a winner. But already, like you're seeing the process going on, the attacks you see on social media, attacks and counterattacks from the different camps show you that probably the opposition not shooting in the same direction. And you talk to some people who are the key players, they will tell you there's nothing like an opposition in Uganda. There are political parties and individuals who think differently. And therefore, it's very difficult to actually think that all these people will think and act the same. So they have different agendas. A case in point, you'll see like Yusufia talked about Asman Basali were losing in Bujiri the other time. There were talks going on. We actually saw people of JEMA going to the FDC headquarters, and the thing was they should leave Asman Basali to be the candidate. But the FDC actually said, look, we are looking at building our party, and getting this member elected is one of the ways of actually building a party. So there are different thinking out there, and the opposition members and different political parties will act differently. So I think there's also competition within the opposition camp itself. You hear people talking about who will actually become the leader of opposition in parliament. So there are so many things at stake. And I don't think they will leave the election unscathed. There will still be losers and winners.
My sense of having no opposition in this country is not because there's infighting in the opposition camp, or not because the state will come in hard on them and curse them really badly. My sense of having no opposition in this country is that the people we have on either side of the aisle have the same interests, right? They're both of them are happy where they are. Those in the opposition are happy to keep the status quo as long as they benefit from the opposition, all right? I've often said, I mean, you have 40 million as salary, you have a big car, you're often invited on TV, you're the biggest opinion leader. When you go to a function in the countryside, you're given a front row seat. You don't want to change the status quo, you want it sustained. So we don't have an opposition in this country in the sense that on either side, people are happy with what they have, right? So that's my sense. So if you say, would they be unscathed? No, they're inexistent in the first place. All we see the bickering on this side is bickering so that to guarantee themselves position in the parliament, not to change the status quo, but to continue eating, right? All of this hobnobbing towards Bobi Wine is because Bobi Wine looks like a guarantor of victory, right? So this is why all of them are running en masse towards Bobi Wine, because he guarantees them victory into parliament, or into the small constituency which they're standing. But that said, I think there's a genuine constituency of young people who have not tested the sweetness of holding political office, who really want genuine change. Those sadly have been colonized by the dark-suited, pot-bellied politicians who have now taken over the movement that Bobi Wine once headed really well and mutated into people power. So there's that group, right? So if you say, are they going to be scarce at the end of the day? Wow, it's normal. As long as the opposition, you're going to an election, this is Museveni's tough. The best thing that Museveni knows in this country is to win the election. If he cannot win it, he knows how to keep the presidency, right? So, and the people who have on this side, all of them have a price, as he has said.
All right. Thank you so much, Yusuf. Thank you so much, Kenneth. And thank you so much, our viewers, for watching us. We'll be back again next Sunday with the Fourth Estate, discussing what happens in the media, what angles the media has taken, but most importantly, how better the media can be from covering stories within Uganda. Have yourselves a good evening.